Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night to our listeners, wherever you are on the globe, and welcome to the webinar on Israel-Hamas war backgrounds and implications. We have an impressive number of guests registered and participants, and I want to thank you all for joining in. I'm Eli Rechet. I'm the Crown visiting professor for Israel Studies at Northwestern, head of the Israel Innovation Project, and liaison at the Office of the Vice President for International Relations. Both these bodies are organizing this event. We've gathered an outstanding team of speakers today who I hope will provide us with a wide spectrum and comprehensive outlook on the ongoing war, and will help us understand where we are and where we are going. Allow me to introduce the speakers. I'll begin with Tzipi Livni, a distinguished Israeli politician and public figure. Tzipi received her law degree from Bar Ilan University in Israel. Over the course of her illustrious career, she held numerous ministerial positions in Israeli governments under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. She served, among others, positions as Vice Prime Minister and Foreign Minister under Ehud Olmert. With the establishment of the Netanyahu government in 2009, she became head of the opposition and later served as Minister of Justice under Netanyahu. She left the political arena in 2019. Hussein Ibish is a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C. He's a well-known scholar, author, commentator on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. He has expertise in a range of topics, including Arab-American relations and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hussein is a weekly columnist for The National at the UAE and a monthly contributor to the International New York Times. Third speaker, Aaron David Miller. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, focusing on U.S. foreign policy. Aaron has served at the State Department as an analyst, negotiator, advisor to Republican and Democratic secretaries of state. He helped formulate U.S. policy on the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli peace process, most recently as the senior advisor for Arab-Israeli negotiations. He has received the State Department's Distinguished, Superior, and Meritorious Honor Awards for his contributions. Quick word on the order of the day. I'll pass the mic, or whatever it is in this virtual setup, to Aaron, who will be both moderator and commentator. He will begin and talk on the American perspective on the war. Then Hussein will take the floor. And lastly, Tzipi Livni. We'll end with a short Q&A session, which Aaron will manage based on questions that were sent to us and some of his. And then we'll hopefully end the session on time. So without further ado, a word of thank you first to the speakers for agreeing to participate in this event, and also to the staff that helped, first and foremost, Crystal, Falkara Hips, and Aditi, who helped this event happen. So, Aaron, the floor is yours.
Eli, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you, of course, and with Hussein and Tzipi. All of you are longtime friends and colleagues. I want to begin with three simple observations before I get to the U.S. role, which have helped me navigate the last 40 days or so. I'm not an Israeli, I'm not a Palestinian. I'm observing these horrific events from afar. And I'm not here to sell you anything either. These three observations have helped me during the course of the last month or so, and perhaps you'll find some value in them. Number one is humility. I've watched and/or helped to facilitate some of the diplomacy around most of the Israeli-Palestinian and Israeli-Lebanese conflicts over the course of the last 25 or so years. Never have I seen a conflict, in my experience, about which we know so little. The degree of opaqueness, of opacity in these events is truly stunning. We know almost nothing about the state or fate of the 240 hostages. We know a little bit more, perhaps, about the status of the negotiations brokered by the Qataris, who host the external leadership of Hamas, with American, Israeli, and perhaps at certain points, Egyptian participation, with very little about the current status of these negotiations. We know almost nothing on a granular scale about the Israeli ground campaign. We know what Israeli objectives are, but the Israelis, for reasons from their perspective that are certainly understandable, control the information space largely in the ground campaign. And we know very little, even though we're speculating, and it appears as if, at least 40 days in, that the Israeli-Lebanese front may not escalate into a much more severe confrontation, which would take the region back to the days of the summer of 2006, when for 34 days, Israel and Hezbollah waged war with one another. Should that escalate in today's environment, the dangers presented by that conflict will be far worse. We're speculating and perhaps hoping that there'll be no escalation. And I guess my point here with respect to humility is it really imposes on all of us to be circumspect, and I think pretty sober in the kinds of judgments and speculation that we're making. It requires self-discipline. Second is humanity. The Hamas terror surge of October 7, the sadistic and indiscriminate mass killing, created a new standard of savagery and brutality with respect to this conflict. My own view here is that despite that, we cannot close our hearts or our minds to the suffering, the displacement, and the deaths of thousands of Palestinians. Secretary Blinken, I think, said it far better than I. In war, when it comes to the deaths and injuring of innocents, there is no hierarchy. A Palestinian and Israeli life are of equal value. And finally, hope and history. I was in Jerusalem on October 6, 1973, 50 years ago, this October. I witnessed a society in trauma, the greatest intelligence failure in the history of the state of Israel until this recent failure, and extraordinary trauma. And yet within 6 years of that trauma, Egypt and Israel had signed a full treaty of peace. In that case, trauma had turned to hope. 20 years later, I sat on the White House lawn and watched in somewhat disbelief US President, PLO chairman, and Israeli prime minister sign the Oslo Accords. And in one of the most galactic failures in terms of my own analysis and misjudgment, I somehow believed that Israeli-Palestinian negotiations had reached a point of no return. So in that case, it wasn't trauma turning to hope. It was hope turning to trauma. I say this only, not because I can divine or predict the future, but the truth is, we don't know what's in front of us. We can't know. And the arc of history bends in ways that are often incredibly strange and unpredictable. It's up to us to do more than hope, but to fearlessly and tirelessly work to see if we can somehow bend that arc in the right direction. Every breakthrough in this conflict that occurred in the conflict zone was preceded by war, terror, and insurgency. I don't know, in view of the traumas that have been experienced in both societies, whether or not something better than what we witnessed can be fashioned. But at the same time, I think it is absolutely critical that we not surrender to hopelessness and to despair. Let me make a few brief comments before I turn matters over to my friend Hussein Ibish about U.S. policy. I'll lay this out as directly as I can. I would argue, watching the administration over the course of the last month or so, it seemed to have had 4 objectives, maybe 5. Number one, to send an unmistakable signal that the Biden administration was prepared to give the government of Israel the time, the space, and the support that it needed to deal with Hamas militarily. What that means is unclear. Whether or not the Israelis have a standard and a set of metrics for victory, I don't know. But the October 10th speech of the president, which was one of the most powerful and emotional of his presidency, I think set that frame. And it was predictable, and it should have surprised no one that that would be the frame that he set. The president's persona, alone among modern presidents, US presidents, he has a history with Israel that, unlike any other, probably unlike any other American politician, and the presidential model here for Joe Biden is not Barack Obama, it's Bill Clinton. Though of different generations, both have this high regard, even love for the idea of Israel, imprinted both on their emotional and on their political DNA. The president's politics also highly suggested that his support would be, in the beginning stages, unqualified, in large part because, like so many other issues in America today, Israel has become a deeply polarized issue, at least among political elites. You have a Republican Party that has set itself up as the Israel can do no wrong party, and you have a deeply divided Democratic Party. And the president needs to find a way, and is trying to find a way to navigate politically a very fraught course. And third, the third sort of driver of what I consider to be pretty unqualified support for Israel was the fact that as the Americans looked at the conflict, they had no better answers than the Israelis on the 2 or 3 critical issues that seem to divide Washington and Jerusalem. Number one, how to prosecute a war against Hamas when in fact its military and political assets are deeply embedded with the civilian population. How to do that while protecting Palestinian innocent life and avoiding a humanitarian catastrophe. I do not think that the U.S. has any better answers for the Israelis. They've suggested they sent a 3-star general who had experience in Mosul to counsel the Israelis. He may have suggested changing the ordinance, looking at better intelligence, a more targeted set of military operations, avoiding airstrikes whenever possible, but no compelling alternative to either that or how to surge humanitarian assistance into the South when in fact the agendas of Israel, Hamas, and Egypt on this question are driven by a series of separate interests. It's stunning to me, a month into this conflict, that hundreds of Americans, let alone others, in Gaza, still cannot exit the country. The second goal was deterrence. And I think the administration, in deploying 2 carrier strike groups with 200 fighter aircraft, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, a nuclear-powered submarine, has sent an unmistakable signal both to Hezbollah and Iran that there would be a cost if, in fact, either of them chose to escalate. Whether that deterrence will hold strikes me as extremely difficult to say. The third objective, obviously, is trying to use contacts through the Qataris and with Israeli participation, and at times Egyptian, of how to develop a strategy to release hostages. The president said only yesterday that he thought a hostage release was going to happen. There are any number of reports of the terms of these releases. It's the one thing I don't speculate on publicly, because I have really no information on what the quid pro quos are and what the likelihood of releases are to be. I would also identify one final objective, which is the day after. And I think here, the administration, as well as anyone else looking at the situation in Gaza right now, could only speculate on what the elements of such a day after would involve. First of all, I think we need to get over the notion that there is going to be a day after, that some bright line will exist between the end of Israeli military operations on one hand, and then a period of stability that will somehow play itself out in Gaza, giving all of the interested parties in this day after the time and space to come to some sort of transitional mechanism that would guarantee for the people of Gaza, as well as for the Israelis, the security, in the case of the 2.3 million inhabitants of Gaza, the prosperity that they have long been denied. I think it's extremely uncertain. The elements of this involve a revitalized Palestinian Authority, highly questionable, but perhaps possible. The participation of key Arab states, not with boots on the ground, but certainly politically and financially. And then, of course, the galactic task of providing humanitarian assistance to half of Gazans who have been displaced, and then a concerted effort, basically, to engage in serious reconstruction. And I think we need to be extremely sober about how quickly and or simply it will be to construct such a day after. So let me stop there and turn matters over, the virtual mic, so to speak, to my friend and colleague, Hussein Ibish.
Thank you, Aaron. It's really a great pleasure to be with you all today. Joining you from the United Arab Emirates, where I've learned a lot about the reaction in the region to what's been going on since I got here a few days ago. Just before I look at, I'm going to try to really quickly go through the reaction to the current conflagration by 8 different, believe it or not, Arab parties. So I'm going to move quickly. All right, but I'm not going to break anything. I just do want to say that Aaron is right. This is the most difficult to predict and sui generis situation we've had in the region in terms of Israeli border wars since 1982. I haven't felt as uncertain about what's happening and why and what's likely to happen since then. All right, and that was when I was a little kid. So there you go. The other thing is, I agree with Aaron that it may not be necessarily the only way to look at things, at history as a genealogy of human choices. There are all kinds of determinism, and if you want to be Freudian about it, you can. But the only useful model from a political standpoint is to look at history that way. So yes, we can, of course, we can change things. Things will change, and they can get better or worse or stay the same. And that's really the only model worth having. Right. So the Arab parties, right? First, Hamas. I just want to try to give my gloss on what Hamas thinks it's doing. And I've been saying this since October 8, and I've received a great deal of criticism for this perspective in the first few days, but it's becoming increasingly obviously correct. What Hamas wants is to pursue its prime directive. The prime directive of Hamas, which was founded in the firmament of the first Intifada in 1987 by the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, is to take over the Palestinian national movement. That's it. Everything to do with Israel and more than that is secondary. everything begins at home, right? You start a political movement to seize domestic power. Every party wants to take over its country. Every group wants to take over. Every faction in a party wants to take over the party. This is axiomatic. This is how human beings operate. And so Hamas is not focused mainly on Israel or anything else. It's focused mainly on taking over the Palestinian national movement. And for reasons I'm not going to bore you with, though if anybody wants to ask me, I'll explain. They've felt increasingly boxed in the past couple of years. Everything was going dreadfully for them over the past 3, and then especially 2, and above all, the last 1 year. And so they really felt to act. The proximate cause was surely the potential triangular deal between Washington, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, which would have included a significant Palestinian component, TM, which would have meant a lot of stuff for who? For the Fatah-dominated groups in the West Bank. In other words, for the arch rivals of Hamas. I think they acted when they did. Not that they weren't planning this for a long time. They were. And there are bigger motives, which I'll get to in a second. But they needed to act when they did because there was a real threat that their rivals were going to receive a big wave of benefits gratis without agreeing to anything. And this would have been very damaging to Hamas, which was struggling on multiple fronts. I think their main aim, they knew, by the way, even if their attack on October 7 was more quote unquote successful than they expected, and they expected more resistance and that they would only get, say, a few dozen hostages and kill, maybe a few dozen people rather than this killing spree they managed to go on. It doesn't matter. They knew that what they were doing changed the rules and that Israel was going to respond with a very violent reaction, and I think they were counting on that. And I think they were prepared to do this again and again until Israel did make an overreaction in the sense. What they want is to draw Israel into Gaza in a long-term presence. I don't think they have any confidence that they can win in the initial phase of fighting. Now, as Israel secures the above ground, and then when they go into the tunnels, I think Hamas understands that while they can do a lot of damage, they're going to lose, in the short run. What they want is something in the longer term. They want to establish an insurgency against an Israeli ground presence. They want to be able to say to the Palestinians and other Arabs, listen, we are fighting the occupiers every day for control of Palestinian land in Gaza. And every week we kill some, we capture some, we do something, wave the bloody shirt, and contrast this with the PA and its security coordination with Israel in the West Bank, and the PLO sitting at an empty table, listening to crickets and waiting for negotiations that never happen. And when they do, they don't achieve anything. And this is their sort of medium-term strategy, I believe, for taking over the national movement. Now, they package this, they market this as an effort to put the Palestinian issue back on the international agenda. But this is kalam fadi. This is nonsense, okay? This is just rationalization. What they want is a war, a long-term war that will benefit them politically at the expense of their rivals in the West Bank. So moving on to Fatah and the PA and the PLO in the West Bank. What do they want? They're bystanders right now. But given what Hamas has done, Hamas should logically, even if Israel does not give them what they want, which would be a reoccupation of the urban streets of Gaza, and then give them the insurgency that they crave, even if not that, it ought to be the case that Hamas has taken itself off the table as an interlocutor for any legitimate actor under any circumstances, right? I mean, the fact that Qatar still hosts the diplomatic arm of Hamas is pretty scandalous in my view. But look, the point is this. It's unclear if the rivals of Hamas will benefit, because the Netanyahu government, including Mr. Gantz, shows no interest in doing that at this point. They seem to be as hostile to Abu Mazen, the PLO, and Ramallah as ever. And you can understand that if the for Israel is annexation and expulsion in the West Bank, which it may well be. And I think it probably has been since the summer of 2000. But that's certainly not everybody. And it's a formula for catastrophe. because this policy of divide and rule among Palestinians that has been followed by the Israeli right so kind of religiously since 1987 and especially since 2007 led to October 7th. Now we know what it's going to look like. So Israelis can have, I mean, more of this in the future if they want, or they can decide to deal with the Palestinians who want to talk to Israelis rather than the Palestinians who want to shoot and kill Israelis. That's pretty much the binary choice. And Fatah, if they're sensible, will not say no to whatever the international community can come up with at the end of this. Even if it's based on something as far-fetched as the Trump proposal or anything, what they have to say is not the old cliche of yes, but. They don't have the power to do that. They need to say yes, and. If they say yes, and, they'll be all right. I'm hoping, judging by their attitude towards the Israeli-Saudi-American negotiations, that they've gotten to the point where they understand the need to do that, because that's what we're doing with regard to that potential agreement. But I'm not sure, because the Palestinian sort of political dimension is so heavy with nationalistic fervor that it may be very hard to maneuver that way. All right, moving on to Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Lebanon was put in a real pickle here because there were these meetings in Beirut in the summer, which were reported on in the Lebanese Arabic language press and now made it English language press, between Quds Force guys from Iran and Israel and Hezbollah and Hamas. And Hamas had talked about a potential attack on Israel, and they were encouraged by the other two groups. So go ahead, we'll be right with you. But I think it's obvious they didn't know when this was going to happen, and they were treating it all as a sort of theoretical enterprise. And Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah were put in a very, very difficult situation on October 7 because they did not anticipate what had happened, and they did not know what to do. So Nasrallah had to ask, what should I do to Iran? And the Iranians told him very clearly, you're on your own. Do what you want. This is the worst possible answer, because now he can't hide behind the Iranians, but he can't say they made them do anything or not made him do anything. So he went into hiding. And it became very obvious that he understood the choice was between looking like a feckless idiot and a betrayer, or courting utter disaster, because Israel has been very clear that it would not spare any part of Lebanon, and the Lebanese, including his own supporters, would not, half of his own supporters would never forgive him. So this, if he did get involved in a confrontation over, with Israel over Gaza, of all things, he would be risking the political and military power that Hezbollah has built up over decades, and that has become Iran's main deterrent force against an attack by Israel on Iranian nuclear facilities. Neither Iran wants to waste its trump card on Gaza, of all marginal places from their point of view, nor does Hezbollah want to risk its future and possibly even its future survival, not just in its current status, but in general, over something as marginal as Gaza. It's, again, if this had managed to spread, as Hamas was hoping it would, into West Bank and especially Jerusalem, and they marketed it as the Al-Aqsa flood. Why? Because they wanted to put the stamp of Islam and Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa on it from the beginning, even though it wasn't involved in that. But they were sort of counting on it to become regional. And they're not going to get their way, because I do think the one thing that all four parties that could make this a regional configuration, that is to say, Iran, Israel, Hezbollah, and the United States, have all agreed upon since October 8th was much better if it does not spread. And none of them want it to spread. So it hasn't spread, and I don't think it's going to, but Aaron's word of caution is important. Egypt. Two things about Egypt, maybe three. One, Egyptian policy since 1979 not to get sucked back into an administrative role in Gaza under any circumstances. They're not going to change that policy for Netanyahu, for Israel, for Hamas, for Abu Mazen, for anybody. Number two, It has been Egyptian policy since the late 40s, or at least the mid-50s, to prevent the transfer of Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt, into Sinai, or anywhere else in Egypt. They're not going to change that policy for anybody else. And no amount of humanitarian suffering is going to make them change that policy. These are national security shibboleths in Egypt. Any idea of a secondary force, non-Israeli force, even a Palestinian one, involving the PA, which is very unlikely, but certainly anything like an international stabilization force, an Arab expeditionary force, a multinational peacekeeping force, a UN peacekeeping force, these are all chimeras for so many reasons. One of them is Egypt is not going to cooperate because Egypt doesn't want to get sucked in, and it would be. The other main reasons are, not only would anyone who comes in to take this over from Israel have to pay for the livelihood of all of these civilians and this devastated place. The insurgency that Hamas plans, which I spoke of, will be turned on any that appears to be acting on behalf of the occupation, including a Palestinian one, but certainly an international one and an Arab one. So if you want to bear not only the cost and the burden of Israel, but also take on Israel's war, you can do that. I don't think anyone in the world is that dumb. So in my view, and again, I invite a question if you want, there are only two potential rulers of Gaza at the end of this, Israel or Hamas. A battered and bloodied Hamas, maybe, but some version of anti may be the least damaging scenario there is. Jordan, of course, is shaking because anything involving the West Bank is very dangerous for Jordan. And annexation, which seems to be linked to this conflict in a weird way, is a death sentence for the Jordanians, or at least that's how they think. Three more countries in the Gulf, and I'll go through them really quickly. Qatar. Qatar believes that it's benefiting tremendously from its close ties with Hamas. And it is because as long as there are hostages to be negotiated for, they have their moment in the sun. And everyone's thanking them and thank you, thank you, thank you. But look, there should be a reckoning at the end of the day. For like, why? Okay, you gave all this money to not necessarily to Hamas, but to Gaza with approval. Everything that happened before October 6th, understood, right? That's fine. But you continue to have the same rhetoric, the same policies, the same friendships, the same relationships as you did before. So apparently, you alone don't think anything changed on October 7th, right? Is that what you really think? It didn't make a dent? It didn't change your policies at all? You're okay with this? These are the kind of questions they may be asked. If that happens, they'll have to rely on daddy DOD. They'll have to go back to the Pentagon and cite Al-Udeid and everything they do for the US militarily and hope that that wins the day, but it could be very sticky for them. The UAE, where I am now, is very discomfited, but nothing that's happened, and as long as war stays contained in Gaza, they're not going to rethink any aspect of the Abraham Accord and the relationship with Israel. That would again be linked to violence in and around Jerusalem or anything that has to do with annexation. Short of that, I don't think the UAE is going to do anything serious to pull back. The last country that's worth mentioning is Saudi Arabia. I think that's a very different story. Saudi Arabia is, I think they probably are. I can't get anyone to tell me this, but I think they probably are resentful that Hamas appears to have tried to exercise a veto over their diplomacy. I would be very angry if I were them. However, at the same time, politically, this was always going to be difficult, and now it's much more difficult. And the thing that I think many Israelis did not appreciate over the past few years, dealing with the Arab world is not a commodity that only goes down in value. It can go up. The price can go up. It's like the price of gold. It goes down, it goes up, it goes up. These are political commodities. The price has gone up. Okay, if Israel had done a deal with Saudi Arabia, not that there was one on the table that was ready to go, but a year ago, 3 years ago, much less than now, a year ago less, well, a year from now, it's going to be a lot more. So that's the big challenge. I think the Saudis are still interested, but the price went up. And I think there's been this delusion in Israel that on the Israeli right anyway, that if we just stay firm, if we just don't move, the price will go to zero because the Arabs need us so much more than we need them, and we must have them, and they don't need us, and or they need us and we don't need them. And so we really don't have to give anything on the Palestinians. We can just have this. And that is wrong as wrong can be. And the idea that the price only goes down over time is, again, it's delusional. And anyone who doesn't notice that the price just went up is not paying any attention. Thanks.
Hussein, thank you so much for that regional tour. Really impressive. Let me now turn to Tzipi Livni. Tzipi, the virtual mic is yours.
Thank you, Aaron and Hussein. I was Minister of Foreign Affairs and Justice Minister during the Second War in Lebanon in 2006 and during 2 military operations in Gaza. I believe in solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on 2 states for 2 peoples, even though it looks quite difficult to do it now. I was the chief negotiator for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And in the last 2 rounds, the Palestinians didn't say yes, but as you suggested, they didn't give an answer at all. On October 7th, I was on my way from Milano, Italy, to Copenhagen to participate in a forum that Madeleine Albright established. It calls the Madeleine Access, so foreign ministers that we used to meet. But when I was in the airport early morning of October 7th, I start getting the information, including a text message about a friend of mine that was killed while defending his community, and I turned back to Israel. As an Israeli, I was a child in 6 Days War and a teenager in Yom Kippur War. I was a minister during the Intifada when buses exploded in Israel and participated in funerals of children. But when I came back home to Israel on October 7th, nothing can compare to this, to anything. It's not the number of people that were killed, that also, but not only. It's the atrocities, the cruelty. They tortured people before killing them, gang rape, killing people from zero range. To those, I'm stating this because I know that there are some massacre deniers and they do not trust what Israel is saying, so maybe I should quote what Secretary Blinken shared with the Congress about the family that they killed, that they gouged the eye of the father, cut the breast of the mother off, and amputated the girl leg and cut the fingers of the boy, and then they killed the family and start eating from the family's refrigerator. So this is just one example. And now we have the families and the babies that and the children and the men and women that were kidnapped without seeing Red Cross. Probably one of the women that was abducted gave birth this week. And so everything, these are really, it's not just another round of violence. These are crimes against humanity. And the frustration, not only mine, of every Israeli, is that just a month later, what we see in the streets is anti-Semitism, a kind of understanding what Hamas did, like we are those that enter Gaza, raped, killed, tortured Palestinians. And I'm not asking the world, as you said, Aaron, to close your heart and minds to the situation of the Palestinian in Gaza, not at all. You say that these lives are equal value, that's true, but there is no equal judgment, not morally, not legally. For those that are looking for children and civilians to kill, and for an army that is using and expressing the right of his country to defend itself, trying to act only against terrorists while they are hiding among civilians and make this job very difficult. And therefore, Israel asked the Palestinians to leave the places where they are when Hamas is hiding, trying to avoid or to minimize the civil casualties. Now, what I want to say to those that are listening to us, that it looks like you need to choose between Israel and the Palestinians, but this is not the right division. On one side, there are those in Israel, on the Palestinian side, in the international community, supporting peace, end of conflict, freedom for the Palestinians, security for Israel. And on the other side, there are those that represent a religious ideology. I disagree with you, Hussein. Their ideology is religious, jihadist. I'm sure that according to my understanding, they don't want to control Gaza at all. They just want to be the armed militia. Their ultimate goal is to destroy Israel. And if, as you say, their goal is to represent the national interest of the Palestinians, so we have a bigger problem than I thought. Because if the national movement, of the idea of the national movement of Palestinian is what I hear in the streets, Palestine will be free between the river and the sea, and the meaning is full elimination of Israel and establishing a state on the ruins of the state of Israel. So we do have a bigger problem than we thought. So I do believe that on the Palestinian side, there are those that represent this religious ideology, Hamas, and other jihadist groups. And on the other hand, there are those that are representing the national solvable conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and this is the legitimate PA. So Hamas is an obstacle for peace, and therefore, Haron, thinking about the way to turn this into hope, or to take this opportunity, there is no hope for peace with Hamas. I hope that we can find another way, but not with Hamas, that is clear. And because Hamas is an obstacle for peace, and it's also a huge problem for the Palestinians in Gaza who deserve to live better life. I want also to express that the war now against Hamas is not just out of rage and revenge, but this, we have a strategic goal. The US administration understands it. Gulf state understands it as well, even though they can have problems in expressing it directly. But I want to pass quickly also the history and the facts, because when I listen to those criticizing now Israel, it is based on false understanding of history, short history. So let's speak a bit. I'll do it shortly because it's not for you, Aaron, not for Hussein, not for Eli, but maybe for some of our listeners. Yes, we are speaking about this tiny place between Jordan River, Mediterranean Sea. The conflict did not started with the establishment of the State of Israel, but the establishment of the State of Israel was part of the solution according to the United Nations that wanted to end an ongoing conflict by establishing two states, Israel as a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jewish leadership accepted it, the Arabs denied, attacked Israel, and at the end of 1948 war, Gaza remained by an Egyptian military control, and the West Bank was the West Bank of Jordan, controlled by Jordan until 1967, when Israel was again under attack, and we occupied these two places, Gaza Strip and the West Bank. In the peace treaty between Egypt and Jordan, Egypt decided to give up Gaza to Israel, and as was said before, they don't want to take Gaza again, unfortunately, I must say. And in the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, Jordan gave up the West Bank to Israel. And then the national Palestinian movement is demanding, asking for the establishment of a Palestinian state that never existed. And the negotiations are based since Oslo, since 1993, based on the idea of two entities, two states, hopefully living side by side in peace and security. This national conflict is difficult enough. We have sensitive issues. We have the refugees. We have Jerusalem. We need to define the borders. I negotiated twice, or maybe even since I listened to Hillary Clinton reminding that Clinton, that her husband offered in 2000 a Palestinian state to be established. This is what we offered in 2008. This is what we offered during the Obama administration in 2014. And Abu Mazen didn't give an answer. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but disappeared. I'm not in a blame game, but just trying to put everything on the table because these are the facts. But the most important fact is that this is not connected to what Hamas is doing, because Hamas does not represent any legitimate Palestinian interest, as Hezbollah in Lebanon does not represent any legitimate Lebanese interest. Both of them are representing a completely different interest. Now, the most important fact is that since 2005, there is no Israeli occupation of Gaza Strip. I was a minister at the time. We evacuated thousands of settlers that most of them were born in Gaza Strip, but we decided to demolish the settlements, to uproot these people, to take out our forces, and for 20 years there is no one Israeli soldier, no one settlement in Gaza Strip. And then there were elections on the Palestinian side. I tried to convince at the time the American administration to deny the participation of Hamas during these elections, because I said that there is no democracy in the world, that terrorist organization that does not accept the rules of democracy, rules of law, rule of laws, the fact that the monopoly of the use of force is by the government and not by armed militias, for example. But I got two different answers. The one was that, well, they are not going to win the elections. Well, they won. And the second one was, look at Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now they have this political arm, and therefore they will be contained. And a few months later, they attacked Israel and so on. So I think that, the elections were supervised by NDY, so there was a place to say that it's not possible. But the day after Hamas won the elections, the quartet, including the UN, US, Russia, and the EU, I think that maybe this was the last decision that the US and Russia agreed upon, said that any Palestinian government can be legitimate if they will accept the right of Israel to exist, renounce violence and terrorism, and accept or abide to Oslo Agreement, the peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians. And for 20 years, Hamas does not willing to renounce violence and terrorism. And I know for some they are saying, okay, one side terrorist is the other freedom fighter, but this is not the situation, because if the Palestinian wants freedom in Gaza, and I wish that they have, the only way to do so is by renounce violence and terrorism. Because Israel doesn't want to control Gaza. What is called the siege is because they are continuing, Hamas, to infiltrate, to bring more and more weapons. So when we are speaking about the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians, well, maybe they don't have, well, they have, but they still have all these rockets and the tunnels that they built underneath Gaza, the entire Gaza Strip, for their own purposes. And when somebody of their leaders was interviewed, he said, the tunnels are not for the citizens, it's for us. Of the Palestinians, not us. So this is the problem of the Palestinians as well. So we have no other alternative, frankly. We left Gaza Strip, hope that, I mean, we were speaking about greenhouses and we got green flag of Hamas in return. They start attacking Israelis. So at first we acted against Hamas, but not in a robust manner as this war. Hope that we got deterrence, but it didn't hold. We had another round and we reached a kind of understanding of ceasefire. And yes, on October 6th, there was ceasefire until they decided to massacre, to slaughter, to do these horrific things. And therefore, there is no other alternative. And the goals of this war, of course, is to bring the hostages back home. And I truly hope that this will be sooner than later, and to eliminate Hamas. Now, there is a question, I heard a question, what does it mean? I don't want to enter into all these military aspects. And I want also to be honest, to speak also that I represent my views in Israel. There are those in Israel, not only my view, but a portion of the Israeli public opinion and also some of the political parties in Israel. It is true that there are those believing in annexation and greater Israel and supporting more settlements activities, but no matter what, it's not an Israeli interest, and this is an internal debate in Israel. But it's clear that it is not the Israeli interest to reoccupy Gaza Strip. So the only need is to take care of our security. And therefore, I do believe that it's very important to speak about the day after. And I believe that the day after should start now. I agree that the current Israeli government has some problems in defining the day after in a manner that would create hope for peace with the legitimate PA. And therefore, in order to turn this situation into hope, the parameters are that the day after, Hamas would not control Gaza Strip and does not exist as this military or armed militia. The regime should be one without aspiration or capability to destroy Israel, and that has a capability to act against terror or to give the legitimacy by the international community or the one that will control Gaza Strip, that Israel would act within Gaza Strip in the future, not stay forever, but would act in order against terror within Gaza Strip, unless somebody else would be willing to do so. But it looks like that nobody, unfortunately, is willing to do so. And therefore, there's a need for international, and especially, yes, Egypt and Jordan and Gulf State, with Israel and the PA to define the day after. No need to say that when we are speaking now about the international community, there is no really Security Council these days that is functioning. So it would be a like-minded state. The ultimate goal, the goal in the end should be demilitarized Gaza. It will take time. But maybe we should speak not just in terms of a day after, but in terms of a process or interim, and something that would lead to another, that would give the possibility to take care of the humanitarian situation, to reconstruct by different international organizations or the legitimate PA in a manner that will turn into this awful reality into something the creator. And I do believe in relaunching the negotiations between Israel and the PA, not Hamas, but the PA. I think that Saudi, I agree with what you were speaking about. The price is higher, Hussein, relating to the price that Israel would pay to the Palestinians. This is not the way I see it. Not because I don't call it a price that we are paying. I believe that this is our interest. And therefore, it's not something that I give the Palestinians, it's something that I also gain. So I know that for some in Israel, this is the price. No, it's important, because if this is the way that Israel enters also the negotiations with Saudi, maybe they can have now a new role with reviving the PA, helping the PA, helping also or in relaunching the negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians, when they can help by normalization with certain parameters that they will put on the table that will take in consideration the situation on the ground. Lastly, a few words about Lebanon and Hezbollah. Of course, it's not the interest of Israel. You share the interest of Nasrallah, but there is one thing which is clear. For Israelis, after living, dying, and being injured, and this is a national trauma now in Israel, what happened in the south part of Israel, they would not accept a situation in which another terrorist organization, jihadis, would infiltrate into the northern villages. In 2006, we agreed we initiated also with the US United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. The whole idea was to bring with international forces the Lebanese army to the south part of Lebanon, and to take Hezbollah out. Well, it succeeded for a while, but it doesn't hold now. And this is also before this tension turned into a war that this time will not be just against Hezbollah, but also Lebanon as a country will suffer from it as well. So I think that the international community or the US should now invest in how the implementation, possible implementation, new implementation of 1701 would turn the situation, instead of deteriorating into another war, to something that brings security. It's not, I'm not saying that it's not difficult and complicated, but the other option is dreadful to all of us. Thank you.
Tzipi, thank you so much. That was eloquent and compelling and very comprehensive. Questions. We've got a few that have been submitted, but I wanted to ask each of you one essential question. At least I think it's essential, because without it, we're likely to be trapped in the same long, dark tunnel that we've been in for quite some time when it comes to Israelis and Palestinians. And that is the issue of leadership. In order to do anything of real value and consequence, you need leaders on both sides who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies and their politics. You need leaders who believe deeply, not because of external pressure, but because of their own internal logic and the needs of their constituencies, and are prepared to recognize the needs of the other. And that is my biggest problem it's been my biggest problem all along. Every time there's been a breakthrough in this conflict, it is as a consequence of leaders who were prepared to step up. Maybe not for moral or ethical reasons, but for practical political reasons. When this ends, you're going to be dealing with two traumatized societies. I just wonder if each of you could address, Tzipi, you on the Israeli side, Hussein, you on the Palestinian side, what kind of leadership is likely to emerge in the wake of all this? Hussein, to you first. On the Palestinian side.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I mean, okay, so a great deal of it depends on Israel's policies, because Palestinians operate within a de facto Israeli state. I mean, you can say Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, but in fact, 2007 and even 2005, it occupied from the outside. It controlled the airspace, the coastal waters, the electromagnetic spectrum, and all the crossings except small crossings. So not a non-occupation, it's just a different kind of occupation. So it's rejiggered, yes, and it's not on the ground, but it's also not Gaza an independent place by any manner of means. Neither was it intended to be so. So what you've got is all the Palestinians operating within that framework. Under such circumstances, Israel's choices do a lot to determine what kind of Palestinian leadership is possible. So do Palestinian choices. The policy of divide and rule, of trying to keep Hamas in power in Gaza, but contained, weakened, and periodically cut down to size by so-called mowing the grass, these periodic wars, on the one hand, and keeping the PA in the little small autonomous self-administered enclaves in the West Bank, but institutionally very weak, politically looking ridiculous, and in terms of negotiations, spurned and made to look absolutely absurd, has been a long-standing policy of the Israeli right, especially for a couple of decades now. And it has produced two things: terrible leadership in the West Bank, and the kind of people in Gaza who are capable of masterminding October 7th. It is a catastrophe. If I were an Israeli, I'd be very, very angry with everyone who was ever a part of divide and rule and propping these things up. Now, on the Palestinian side, there's an institutional crisis. It's partly connected to the political malaise in the Arab world in general, but it's also really specific to the institutional weakness of the Palestinian Authority in the West, and the fact that they have preferred, because of that institutional weakness, in part, also part of political culture, partly because of institutional weakness, to be afraid of public opinion, and therefore to restrict civil society increasingly, and so that the inputs among Palestinians in policymaking have shrunk. So now you have Abu Mazen and this small coterie of insiders making all the decisions, often for reasons that are not, reasons of state, let's say, or national interest, but very narrow interests, and that's not good. It's probably necessary for there to be a sustained period of reinstitutionalization in the West Bank before you come up with the kind of leaders who can finalize a two-state agreement with Israel. I would agree with that. I don't know what it's going to take on the Israeli side, because as far as I can tell, Israel is all in.
Right. We'll let Tzipi.
Yeah.
But
right.
I must say, everything you say is correct.
Yeah.
It's just, it answers my question, which is the prospects of a Mandela and or a de Klerk emerging on the Palestinian side is virtually, and again, I don't dispute much of what you say, is virtually
it's not virtually no. I wouldn't agree with that.
For the foreseeable future.
It'll take time.
Okay.
Well, let's say it'll take time.
All right, let's hear from Tzipi on the Israeli side.
Yes. Okay. Firstly, I would reiterate, no terror in Gaza. Gaza could have been opened. Accepting the requirements of Quartet, Gaza could have been open. with an harbor, with an air. This is the only reason for this siege. That's it. Secondly, about Israel, and it is so unfortunate because before October 7th, we had demonstrations within Israel for democracy against the current right-wing, extra right-wing government in Israel. And for a moment, there was a feeling that a new liberal Democrat camp is being born in Israel. And they understand that if we want to keep Israel as a democracy, as a Jewish democratic state, annexation shouldn't be on the table. We need to separate, to reach an agreement, or anyway to keep a Jewish majority without these millions of Palestinians that we don't want to control. And then after October 7th, yes, these camps still, of course, exist. And by the way, the civil society in Israel showed really huge strength and unity and so on. But yet, there are those that are now saying, you see, this is not just Hamas. These are the Palestinians. This is how evil they are. And how could you, and I'm being blamed, not me, also personally, but not only, for the disengagement for Gaza. We left and got Hamas and these atrocities. Oslo agreement was a huge mistake. This is what you can hear now in Israel. But yet, I think that in next elections, or even if there will be a change within the term of this government, Netanyahu will not stay. I don't think that extreme right-wing we will not have the same government anymore. But yet, I do agree that it will be, or it is difficult even for leaders that understand what I just showed with you, that this is the only option, it's not a price that we are paying, but it is our interest, to move forward because of, one is public opinion, but not only, because frankly, we tried this as well. And there was no partner on the other side, or somebody that was willing to take the offers that were on the table. And between 100 and 0, anyway, the Palestinians choose 0, unfortunately, between less than 100 or 0. So I do believe, as you said, Aaron, that the leaders that are needed are those that understand that the political price that they would pay by signing an agreement or reaching peace is less than the price that their people would pay without signing this agreement. But it's a combination also of what would happen on the other side. We need to turn now the public opinion, not in a naive manner that let's sign a peace treaty and we will live happily ever after. We know that this is not the situation, but also in an understanding that you cannot just manage the conflict and continue things that we've done for 50 years, but there's a need for a change in the long run. But it needs to be done in a very responsible manner in terms of security. I believe that this is the goal. This is really something that needs to be done within Israel. I'm not speaking about the Palestinians. And I hope that we see more leaders in a deep understanding that just replacing Netanyahu or right-wing government without changing, the way people are thinking about the conflict is not enough.
Yes. We have a question from our virtual audience on a one-state solution. I'm assuming
it's not a solution. It's one-state reality, not a solution.
Right.
We have it now.
I'm assuming
we have it now. I mean, there's nothing to wonder about.
Right,
We've got it.
But the notion that Israelis and Palestinians can somehow live happily ever after under one roof, if any crisis is demonstrated that is a fundamental fallacy, it's certainly this one. So the question is, what about a one-state solution? But let's talk about the obverse. Is the least bad solution to this conflict separation through negotiation into two states? Hussein, briefly.
I mean, because there has to be self-determination for both peoples, right? There has to be some version of two states. One way of accommodating the reality of the settlement project and all of these things that Israel has gone forward with since 1993 that have made life so difficult for people who want a peaceful agreement would be to reconceptualize statehood as part of a confederation, something like that. That's one way of doing it. If the Israelis and Palestinians can make it fly, Jordanians eventually would probably join as well, though they would want to see those two make it work first. It's not ideal. The best thing would have been a clear separation along Westphalian, post-Yugoslavian kind of lines. Serbs here, Croats here, that's it, we have embassies, finished. It didn't happen for many reasons. I would just say the PLO recognized Israel in 1993. Israel has never, ever, not once recognized the Palestinian right to a statehood.
This was the basis
state.
for all the negotiations since then.
No, it wasn't. No, that's not true. The 1993 letters of mutual recognition recognized Israel as
I'm speaking about the negotiations later. Okay.
It's nothing in writing by the state of Israel accepting the Palestinian right to a statehood. Couldn't put it in front of me as an official government document. It doesn't exist. That's a problem. So if we could at least start on that basis, maybe we could do a Dayton and negotiate backward from that. But we never did do that.
Tzipi, you want to add anything?
Yes, no, firstly, speaking, the negotiations, including in 2003, the agreement for negotiations had only one sentence saying that the negotiations will be based on the division of two states. So it was, no, I can assure you this. And since I negotiated, that was clear during the negotiations. And in 1993, Israel didn't recognize it because Israel existed at the time. And it was by recognizing the PLO at the time as representative. But for me, I agree that the national aspiration of the Palestinians are legitimate, as our aspiration as Jews for a state of our own is legitimate and should be recognized, and it is recognized. And therefore, there is no one-state solution for a national conflict. There is one-state reality that we can find ourselves living in one-state reality. And I hear the voices also coming from the US, by the way, from young people, because in the past, the call was for two states, for two peoples, and for respecting the national aspiration of the Palestinians. And now the voices are about individual rights. And so in a way, they do not respect not the national aspiration of the Jewish people, neither the Palestinians. And this would lead to, first, as an Zionist, I'm focused on this since my first day in politics, because I want to keep Israel as a Jewish democratic state, and I respect the Palestinians' aspiration as well. But one state, the meaning is, one, without accepting or implementing the national aspiration of both peoples, and secondly, it will be bloody, violent, as we just saw. And this is my answer to also right-wingers in Israel. After you saw these atrocities, do you want to live with this? Within the same boundaries? No way.
Well, we've come to the end of the program, and I must say, listening to the both of you, if the two of you were negotiating to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think there would be tough negotiations. But I'm absolutely persuaded that in the end, you would absolutely.
Can I quote Sai Barakat, who once said about me, she's a tough negotiator, but the others are non-negotiators.
I give you actually a little more credit than that, Tzipi. But I want to give both of you credit for your wisdom, your authority, your clarity, and your honesty under very difficult circumstances. Tzipi Livni in Israel and Hussein Ibish now in the Emirates. I wish both of you nothing but the best, and maybe there'll be an end to the long dark tunnel that we're in. I certainly hope so. But thanks again.
I hope so.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Western University. Even though I'm a Michigan Wolverine, Northwestern's an incredible school with a great campus, and I wish everybody well. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.
Aaron, if
Goodbye,
I may-
Hussein and Ellie. Thanks.
I may add my word. I see Aaron is gone. Yeah, a short word of thank you for me. There are a lot of webinars going on. Everybody does a webinar. And I think we managed to review the complexity of the situation in a respectful and a wide spectrum way. So thank you again. And I'm looking forward to more such ventures in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellie.
And thank the participants. We had, at the height of it, we had 400 people on. So this is not bad. Thank you.
Oh, it's
Okay,
good.
thanks.
Thank you very much.